Hello, everyone, and welcome to our monthly Q&A with John Vervaeke. Thanks for being here, John.
My pleasure. Always great to be here.
And just so everyone knows, we have just passed the other day on the 23rd, our 1 year anniversary of the start of this Discord. So that's quite,
Congratulations.
yeah, thank you. And thank you to you, John, and to everyone here and all the members. I mean, it's been quite a journey over the last year, and who knew that this would lead to something that seems to be somewhat permanent, and that's fantastic. I'm really happy for that, and really thankful to everyone here who's been part of the Discord in the various ways. And as we move into a new phase, as we have lots of plans coming forward to really bring out the meaning community and really hopefully make some great changes in the world. We will start now. Just so we know, we're using a new system today, so there may be technical difficulties, but hopefully it'll work. The first question is from Marcosi Bird, and Marcosi Binds. Apologies, and go ahead, Marcosi. We don't hear you if you're trying to speak. I've invited you to speak. You may have to accept the invitation. All right. Well, we'll have to come back to Marcosi. Let's try Cliff. Cliff, you have a question for John.
Yeah, hello. Thanks for having me here. Let's see. Hello, John. I hope all
Hi,
is well
Cliff.
with you.
Pretty good. I hope all's well with you too.
Yeah, yeah. Now, just something real quick from me, because I want to take 2 minutes to recap my previous question, and I want to see if there's anything new you would suggest
Sure.
regarding, because last time I had a pretty beefy question, and we were a bit short on time. Now I think we have a little more time.
Mm.
So, like I said, I am a practicing Stoic. Well, at this point, I'm a bit more than that. I take on many practices from many wisdom traditions. I participate in a few Stoic communities,
Mhm.
just local stuff. It's so in short, things I can tangibly control. I can't control externals, but these are people who listen to me.
Mhm.
Now, I am responsible for as long as these people come to me, regardless if they're within our micro stoas or whatever you want to call them. People are interested in my understanding of, know, wisdom cultivation, which is incomplete, which is I've only been doing this for a few years. I don't know, 5, 6 years. um, I'm nowhere close to sagacity. I don't know if it's practical. You get it. But
Mhm.
the community itself is lacking in rituals, social interactions which cultivate wisdom. Now, thing is, so if there is like a leader, this leader is just for administrative purposes. That's the problem, you see.
Mhm.
Now, yeah, the question was, what should I be doing now that I have a substantial amount of discipline regarding what concerns my character, what concerns my ability to live well. But I'm alone right now in this ability. And then there's people around me, which I'm trying to uplift in this sense, not with like a superiority connotation, but with a strong sense of humility. That's a failure of mine, I will admit. these things, even that requires discipline. And your answer previously was for me to learn, for me to seek a career in philosophical counseling.
Yeah.
And in short, this is humanly possible. It's just going to be a superhuman effort on my part. I mean, it's a great suggestion, and I have planned for it because it's not the first time it's been suggested to me. It's just that when you did it, I realized I think there might be some substantial potential here. This is worth dedicating a lifetime to, you see. And your other suggestion was to stick around, actually learn some practices which bind communities together, such as Lectio Divina and stuff like what the virtuous philosophical friendship, like you teach on YouTube and outside of these places. So from this, I intuited I should be seeking out more Epicurean practices, since that's profoundly important, you see, and maybe something along the lines of what's going on in a Zen temple, because these guys have some profoundly. You can't enter a temple without having a polite bow. You have to bow towards your fellow people. You have to bow towards the statue of the Buddha. You have to. It gets you in. It's a social ritual. It gets you in the correct. How do you say it? Perspectival knowing. It gets you in the and that's profoundly important, because these Stoics are going to learn all of this wisdom and then return to their previous materialistic having mode relationships with things, and then they're going to be crying when they fail to brute force a mindfulness. You understand that Stoic vigilance in something more. It's not soft. It's not the same soft vigilance that you teach. It's something more active. It's something more iron fist sort of thing, which is no good. It gets you. It's exhausting. That's all they have.
Yeah.
Now, my question today would be, if there's anything else. I have a direction now, and I profoundly appreciate that you are capable of giving me this. But if there's anything else you would like to add aside from what has developed so far.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that excellent recap, Cliff. Much appreciated.
Yeah.
Now that I have a bit more time, I would recommend, especially since you're already considering the mindfulness path, and this is something, and it's come out in discussions with Ray Kelly, how the academy got separated too much from the gymnasium, and ancient Stoicism was much closer to that. And so I would recommend, you consider either taking it on yourself or partnering up with somebody who can bring to your community a movement practice, a moving mindfulness practice. There's increasing evidence showing that if people start they can really build from mindful movement, and when they also start to move together in a mindful fashion, this is tremendously powerful for laying the foundation for kind of communing with each other that helps to build a shared, love for wisdom. And so I think you might want to consider that. And then I would also recommend, especially if you're going to go into the Zen tradition, which you should take a look at the work of the Kyoto school, Nishida.
Kyoto school,
and Nishitani specifically. And then also, there's just been an amazing amount of really good scholarship recently on Socrates. Now, some of this is academic, and I don't want to just like foist a bunch of stuff on you, but the interpretation of Socrates just going through this significant revival and, to my mind, improvement that makes Socrates more spiritually and existentially relevant than ever before. And that may also help to give people a more concrete exemplar that they can, internalizing the sage. Share together.
If I may interrupt you for 1 second.
Sure.
So the thing with Socrates in the Stoic tradition is that what has profoundly happened is that Socrates has not just become like a legend. Socrates, in the image of the sage, becomes a legend of practically ethical, physical, and logical perfection, which is, it does surpass the actual Socrates, or rather, the Platonic Socrates that we experience in the dialogue. You see, and that's what's truly valuable.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because that's exactly that distinction helps the clarification. I think because what's happening is the more Platonic and even Neoplatonic reading of Socrates is coming to the fore. And I think in the way that you just articulated, I think that could be particularly valuable to the Neo-Stoicism that's prevalent today. So yeah, I agree with you on that. And I think that's the correct way to frame it. What I can say is, because I'm doing so much work on preparing for After Socrates, that current is gaining strength. The Platonic and Neoplatonic interpretation of Socrates is gaining strength. And I think it has much to offer people in Stoicism. And we know that Stoicism eventually, historically, was taken up into Neoplatonism. And perhaps there's a potential bridging for your community there.
Yeah. I will tell you, I don't know enough about Neoplatonism. I only recently began studying the tradition, so I'm gonna have to take some, check things out. I have to finish your wisdom cultivation series. I'm almost done. So
good.
And then after I finish this, I'm gonna be taking some of those books you mentioned. Then I have to analyze every single practice and every single, I delve into theory as well. It's, I'm friendly with the academics, let's just say, even though most of everyone I know really isn't. I don't hate academics. I like what they do. It's just not, you get it. It's not really wisdom cultivation anymore, most of what they do.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to...
Good talking to you, Cliff.
Yeah, thank you very much, John. I'm glad we went through this together. Yeah.
Me too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. And Maroxy Bind, I think you have fixed your audio problems.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Hi, John. It's good to hear from you.
Hi, Markazi.
I hope that you've been doing well. I had a question, and I'll just read it out here. So my question is there a significant difference between what empiricists gather from the world compared to what rationalists gather from the world? Moreover, are there contrasts and comparisons to be spoken about between what empiricism aims to do and what rationalism aims to do? And how do you find yourself fitting into both of these perspectives? I do want to say one thing beforehand, though, and I want to kind of tell you what provoked this sort of question out of me. Sure. It is from the Self series. I forget what the whole title is called.
The Elusive Eye.
Yeah, the Elusive Eye, exactly, with Greg Enriquez and Christopher Mastropietro. So you were talking about an experiment where these experimenters asked participants um, to point to where their self was,
Yeah.
and some people pointed to the middle temple area, other people pointed to the heart, and so where my question comes from, in the sense of, is there a difference? But not only is there a difference between empiricism and rationalism, but my question is coming from a place where I'm sort of I'm going to be going into graduate school for an emphasis on cognitive neuroscience,
Right.
and
Right.
I'm really trying to sort of wrestle with this idea that you've been talking about, where a lot of the cognitive neuroscience that my institution does is very focused on first generation
Right. Yep.
cognitive psychology, where they're focused on computational systems. They're doing a lot of things on MATLAB and R, all these different data software programs, where they're really, really rigorous in their data gathering, right? So I'd like to ask you for some advice, perhaps, if you could, on um, well, advice in the sense that I don't know whether or not I should continue if all I'm going to do is to be sitting in front of a computer all day, kind of brooding away and typing away in like Python or like these data software programs, even though they do show amazing things when you do get the hang of it. But also, I do want to say I feel as if in experiments there is something, like in the example that I gave with the elusive eye example of the pointing to the self. These certain experiments in which you ask people to do something, it sort of provokes something that is, in at least to me, more robust than something like rationalism can do. That's how I look at it, and I'd love to be either convinced otherwise, or maybe I just have these two, this kind of false dichotomy in my head of empiricism versus rationalism. So I hope that says some things to
Yeah.
speak about.
Yeah. That does. So, I mean, the person who influences me the most, well, there's a bunch of people, but initially is Kant, and sort of Kant's take on the inadequacies of both rationalism and empiricism. And I take that argument, extend it via some other philosophers of science into how science is neither a rationalistic nor a purely empirical endeavor. And let me try and explain to you why that's the case. So empiricism, if you're a pure empiricist, then you are trying to base all of your conclusions on observable events. That's the basic idea. That's what knowledge begins in, and that's ultimately what justifies your knowledge. And the problem that you get with that is the fact that, well, you end up with I mean, this is what happens in the classical history of empiricism. You end up in David Hume, because Hume's point is that, well, what can we actually observe? We can't observe causal relationships. We can't observe the past, and when we're inferring the past, we're doing that on the basis of a causal relation that we can't observe. How could you possibly observe the relationship to the past? It doesn't exist, and by definition, the past is not observable. And so you get into all these huge binds if you try to be sort of an absolute empiricist that leads you into skepticism. And so I think what you're pointing to isn't really a kind of pure empiricism. What I like to talk to when I talk to my students is like to talk about how science is made up of two interdependent things: experimental competition and theoretical debate. See, the problem, even when you relax the empiricism a little bit, is what are you going to look at? What are you going to gather observations on? I can start noting how many shoes are in my room and whether or not that's correlated with how many thoughts I have about Italy. Should I pay attention to that? Should I pay attention to the fact that some of my pictures on my wall are askew, and that might be correlated with how many read books I have on my bookshelf. Should I pay attention to that? Should I start measuring that? And I hope you see the point I'm making. If you were to just open yourself up to raw observation, 99.9% of what you want to observe is not going to get you anywhere. It's not going to help you get at the causal patterns of the world. And so what we actually do in science is we look at patterns that are plausible and we put them into empirical competition. And then that requires, of course, that we debate theoretically, because you can't establish plausibility empirically. You have to presume plausibility in order to get empirical observation going. And so you have to do a lot of theoretical debate as to what the plausible patterns are. So, for example, when I'm doing an experiment, I have to control for confounds. I have to control for possible alternative explanations. Well, which ones? All the logically possible ones? Well, that's an indefinitely large number. So what do? Well, I pick the sort of 3 or 4 most plausible confounds and control for them. Well, where does all that plausibility come from? Well, it comes from theoretical debate and argument and attempts to clarify what a construct is. A vague, and there's another problem with empiricism, a vague construct is really easy to get empirical evidence for. That's a problem facing neuroscience right now. A lot of the constructs, many people are saying this, a lot of the constructs might be at the wrong level of resolution and vague, and therefore very easy to confirm. But the problem, of course, is you don't know exactly what it is you're confirming. And again, you can't decide the clarity of a concept empirically. You have to decide it in theoretical debate. So, but then you might say, well, why not I just be a rationalist? Why don't I just have arguments pitted against each other? Well, then this is the other side of Kant's argument, because all I can do with reasoning is I can only establish the plausibility of things. I can't go on to establish the probability and try to move that probability higher and higher. That can only be established through empirical competition. And I have to rely on a lot of things. I have to rely on judgments that do not properly follow from my reasoning. I have to decide between theories in terms of how elegant they are, how promising they are for future research, how much they give me rediction, which is, back in the past, how much they open up understanding of what was previously known. And so I think what I'm trying to say to you is that both empiricism and rationalism are on their own really inadequate epistemological positions for the practice of science. A good scientist should be empirical enough that they could practice rigorous experimental competition, but also rationalistic enough that they can engage in ongoing theoretical debate, and then enough of a scientist to constantly keep those two acting as checks and balance on each other. And so I've been practicing science myself for a long time. And I think, I guess I'm challenging you. I'm challenging you to not choose between rationalism and empiricism, but go along a Kantian path of choosing beyond them and seeing them both as inadequate epistemologies for capturing the complexities of science and the real actual functioning of human cognition when we're doing science. And then what I would suggest to you is look at the lab, look at the program you're going into. Do they care both about experimental competition and theoretical debate? If they don't, I wonder about the science. We look, the history of psychology, we did, I think it's been calculated, over 100,000 hours of experimental work under behaviorism, really rigorous experiments. And the amount of information we actually learned about cognition was vanishingly small because behaviorism was ultimately the wrong theoretical framework. And so I'm suggesting that you consider more of a Kantian epistemological approach, maybe even a neo-Kantian epistemological approach, and then take a look at how that you could use that as a, sorry, I don't mean to sound imperious here, but I'm arguing that it's a better model of science And if it's a better model of science, it can serve as a better standard by which you can evaluate areas, that are competing for, making you a scientist, because they're going to vary in how well they do this kind of work. And just because it's a university, program doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing really great science. Like I said, we've had long history of things like tons and tons of work. A lot of neuroscience, and I've said this publicly, and I'll say it again. A lot of neuroscience, right, it is using a philosophical theory called the identity theory of mind, which is really not, tenable today, given the real advances of artificial intelligence and the fact that we're discovering that you don't have a strict localization of function in the brain. The brain is constantly exacting, and it's, all of this stuff. So, look for places that they can reach down into experimental rigor, and they can reach up into theoretical rigor. That would be my best advice to you. I hope that's helpful.
That is insanely helpful. That was very resonant with me, John. Would you know the book that Kant speaks about empiricism versus rationalism in?
Yeah, but I wouldn't recommend reading it.
Is it very obscure and kind of?
It's really dense and hard. It's the Critique of Pure Reason. You might want to get instead, a really good Introduction to the Philosophy of Science text.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that, because I've been really thinking about sort of switching into a philosophy of science master's instead of doing cognitive neuroscience, because of the really, really hard reductionism that my institution is experiencing. It's hard to find cognitive scientists like you and Mark Lewis and a bunch of other amazing people from the U of T. I would love to go there. I'm probably about an hour away from there. So, but yeah.
I think being educated in the philosophy of science generally makes people better scientists. And we have here the Institute for the History and Philosophy of Science. My former student and colleague, Corey Lewis, I think has got on YouTube his lectures on the Introduction to Philosophy of Science. If they're publicly available, you might want to check them out, because, Corey's a very good cognitive scientist, and then he brings that, and he was trained at the Institute for the History and Philosophy of Science, and so his take on science, I think, is really good. If we could get more scientists who had some training in the history and philosophy of science and training in training in science, I think we could go a long way towards reducing the replication crisis that's spreading amongst all the sciences, even the so-called hard sciences, and also I think greatly improve the cognitive scientific potential of these sciences, their ability to talk to each other and integrate with each other. So if you could figure out this is really hard. So don't.
That's a question for another time, John.
Yeah. Well,
No, for me, not for you.
No. But I'm sorry. I'm very sympathetic. This is a tough choice. I kind of think you should try and go into the cognitive neuroscience, but do as much of the philosophy of science along the way if you can.
Exactly.
I think you have a greater chance of making a broader impact on the discipline than if you go into sort of pure philosophy of science.
Yeah. That's what I was asking about, the rationalism versus empiricism. And you explain it so well. Thank you so much. I'll stop hogging the floor now, but thank you so much. And I'll ask another question another time, John.
I'm glad I could be of help.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much. Struan, you're up next.
Hi, John.
Hey, Struan. I saw your most recent email. Again, I read them. And so thank you for that.
Okay, so I've got 3 questions here. I don't know which one to really ask, so I'm just going to leave it up to you to answer whichever one. Is that all right?
Okay, that's interesting. Okay. All right.
And I can, so really succinctly, and I can kind of elaborate a bit if needed. So first question, could it not be said that the feedback loop is the essence of relevance? And then second question, How plausible is it to treat consciousness as synonymous with attribution itself? And then the third question, given your recent conversation with Paul Vanderklay and J.P. Marceau regarding how the redemption of the world leads one into argumentation of a teleology, has your view of the implication behind Galileo's so-called killing of the universe changed significantly as a result?
I think the one I want to do is the third one, just because that's sort of most recent in my mind, if that's okay with you.
And I should
Yeah,
say,
so-
Paul's actually just come in to listen, so it's a fortunate time to ask that question.
Paul's here?
Wonderful. Hi, Paul.
Oh,
Yes, he is.
Well, that's great.
I could bring him in if you'd like.
Yeah, that'd be great. Strawn, I still will answer your question, but having Paul here,
let's make it a three-way.
That's fantastic.
Paul, if you're watching, this is a new thing. You have to accept the invite that I sent if you want, and well, he may not.
I saw it at the top of the browser screen. I don't know if it would be there for you.
Okay, I guess I just did it.
Hi, Paul.
Well,
Welcome.
this is good practice for Clubhouse.
Rick just messaged me because Joey said, "Oh, these guys are doing a question and answer in a different way." So I thought, "Oh, I've only got 20 minutes before I've got my next thing." So I thought, "Oh, I'll pop in." So, but go ahead, John, and I'll listen in. And if there's something I think I can add or say, I'm willing to. But I'm only in for 20 minutes, so.
Okay, well, it's always great to hear from you and see you, and thank you for posting the discussion we had with Rafe as well. I think that's a very powerful discussion. So the question, Paul, was sort of towards the end of our three-way dialogos with you and I and JP, how we were talking about one of the big differences. And I think we agreed on this, but interject if I misrepresent you at all. That one of the way the incarnation was different from enlightenment, it wasn't excluding enlightenment, but in one way it maybe went beyond enlightenment, is that it has this idea of the redemption of the material world, or the physical world, I would prefer to say, and the redemption of history. And then I said, it struck me that meant that there's a potential connect. I was seeing a connection. I was seeing something that was in some ways not as clear to me, that why there's so much interest in, the work that like Sam Roberts was doing, etc., in teleology. Because if you could see signs of teleology in the physical universe and in history, that would, I guess, be a kind of evidence for the incarnation above and beyond enlightenment. Is that a fair representation, do you think?
Yeah, I think so.
So, and then what Strawn asked me is whether or not that, I think what Strawn means is not my interpretation of Galileo, which I think is still pretty solid, but whether or not I've shifted from Galileo's take that basically killed the universe, as I said in the series in Strawn. So I did mention towards the end, Strawn, that there's a significant, and I mean by that philosophically profound, I would say at times brilliant work being done by my colleague at U of T, and I work with him periodically, Dennis Walsh. And we shared a graduate student, Alex Djetovic, who just did his PhD thesis on this, about trying to come up with a way of understanding teleology that was not in conflict with what I guess we could call the scientific worldview, and that is actually, their argument is quite strong, is actually necessary in order to talk about living things. And the idea is this, that when we're explaining things, we are not only talking about relations of production, we're talking about relations of what conduction, of how things conduce, not only how they produce. And that a full explanation of things is not only from their causal production, but from their teleological conduction. And I'm getting increasingly open to that idea, Strawn. I'm not. I mean, I have a tremendous amount of respect for Dennis's work. I recommend it. I think it's a new way of understanding what Aristotle talked about. That's different from the magnet in the future that's drawing everything forward view of teleology, which from Galileo on we've found very problematic to make sense of. Now. So I recommend that people who are interested in this question, and I will continue to do so too, to take a look at this work and take a look at it very carefully. I'm still hesitant and that's where the discussion left off, Struan. So I'm just being honest. And so if there's a lack of clarity here, it's just because my thinking on this is still premature, right? But I'm still hesitant to trying to extend this notion. This revised notion of teleology to the inanimate world and to history, and the problems I have there are because I see most of the inanimate universe, 99.99% of it, being deeply hostile to life and mind, and to not seeming to being any way organized for life or mind. And I think that issue has to be addressed. And then with the redemption of history, I still find very problematic Auschwitz and Dachau. And I think I want to be really careful here because I don't want to misattribute to people. I will just speak for myself. I find it distasteful, almost disgusting, when people try to say, that was for some greater purpose or good. And then it seems to me that, and this was a question I asked Robert when I was talking to him about teleology, is like, well, what would count as evidence that you're wrong? What would count as evidence that there's no teleology of history? If you've got this narrative that no matter what happens, that counts as evidence of teleology, then it's equally the case that you have no evidence of teleology. And that's the symmetry of absolute argument, right? Problem. And so that's where it sort of stands for me, Struan. I'm sorry, that's probably not as resolved as you might like, but I'm really open to more discussion. But that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, no, I'm actually very happy with that answer. I mean, I have a lot of sympathies with the difficulties that you've listed, and it's not like I just think, oh well, these problems can be magically hand waved away, right? As I've said to you before, I don't put narrative into my metaphysics as such. So I probably do put telos in a little bit, but I'm not. Well, I think that we aren't being responsible with respect to our ability to direct history if we treat it as if it's like a natural force outside of our hands. And so I have this worry with respect to our, taking responsibility for our narratives. And it's,
I think that's a good point. Well, I was going to say, when Hegel saw telos in history, that led to a lot of totalitarian ideologies that spilled a lot of blood. Right, and so I have that worry too. I just wanted to reinforce that point.
Yeah, so I mean, as I said, I'm very sympathetic to the difficulties, and I'm very glad that you're investigating it at the same time. Trying to get the actual telos integrated into at least an articulation of biology that makes sense. Like I mean, as long as it works on the living level, whatever happens, on the so-called inanimate level, it's kind of, I don't care.
Okay.
I don't know if that. Yeah.
Well, like I said, then I strongly recommend the work of Dennis Walsh. Strongly recommend it, and I hope that Alex publishes his PhD thesis as a book, because he specifically takes that and connects it to the idea of agency and 4E cognitive science. And I'm biased because he's my student, but he does it in such a rigorous and eloquent manner.
Yeah, I would be interested in following up more on that.
Paul, I feel that we've excluded you just by our discussion. I want to give you a chance to say anything you'd like to say here.
I'm always a little hesitant to jump into something with Strawn because he's he's thought about so many of these things in so many different ways. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't have anything in this. It's just interesting how teleology is simply so basic to how so many of us navigate everyday life. Goal setting, and I can appreciate the hesitancy with which to imagine it as operating beyond the kinds of agents that we are comfortable identifying. Those of us with ears and hands and eyes, and even when you watch, say, a crow work with a little tool to get something out, it just always, is this something we're projecting on the universe? But it just, the thing that always comes up to me in these kinds of conversations is what are we afraid of? I think part of it is that we're afraid that bigger forces than ourselves have ends desired for us that we necessarily aren't getting a say in. And this happens all the time, obviously, in human relationships with governments, and then sort of the level jumping of a God that has designs on our lives that we potentially are not aware of and don't have much say in or agency to prevent if we're against it. I think these just theologically and pastorally are always the things that we find deeply troubling, and for good reason. But they are a regular part, at least, of human history. People get used all the time. Countries get used. Government agencies and programs get used for purposes. And John, and I hope, I anticipate our next conversation with JP, who's such a wonderful partner in all of this. And I love these papers he's putting out.
Yeah, you do.
Wrestling with the truly evil chapters in human history and the kind of deep questions that these have raised for anybody from a religious tradition that believes that that the universe is somehow governed by a benevolence that is drawing us into a happy future. So that's all tough stuff.
Yeah, I agree. And I do also look forward to, I feel like I boxed you in and put you on the spot. I didn't mean to do that. I'm sorry. I just wanted to give you a chance to talk. Yeah, and I look forward to you and I and JP picking up. One of the things that has been haunting me since that is you said something, and you said it along the way, not dismissively, but you said it along the way, and the way in which you made reference to a pretty important scriptural authority for you on this when you quoted Jesus on the cross, right? And the idea of, my God, why have you forsaken me? And Christianity takes the possibility seriously of people dying, disconnected that way from God, and I think, because I guess why that is resonating with me. I'm hesitating here because this is really just sort of rumbling around in my head. It's somewhat incoherent, but I guess, like I said, I don't like, the narratives about things like Auschwitz and Dachau, like it was all for good, or maybe at the end, all these people, were comforted by God. I think the Bible takes seriously people in the depths of despair facing death. Yeah. And I would like the discussion to take that seriously as well. And I really wanted to, well, you always do this, that took, and the fact that you did it so naturally, really, I'm sorry, Paul, this sounds like something maybe wasn't that prominent for you, but it touched me very deeply because the authenticity and the courage of that, while nevertheless remaining within your Christian faith, I found that very honorable.
Well, thank you. It's, it's an alarming thing, this story that Christians have of, Jesus. Anything we know of Jesus in the Gospels knows that he surely was not deserving of a death of a Roman insurgent. I mean, he by no means, he could have organized a violent insurgency against Rome. He did not. He could have organized a bloody coup against the Jewish religious authorities. He did not. And he is both beaten and crucified, which usually hadn't happened. And so the story is quite clearly set up as a horrendous injustice. And we don't find Jesus on the cross saying, "Oh, this is all part of God's plan. It'll all be okay." And so it's, and pastorally, one of the things that you learn in talking to people because pastorally, people are not shy about, at least if you've developed a mature enough pastoral relationship with them, people are not shy about expressing their anger towards God and his management of the universe when, their child has suffered or a marriage has blown up or, some really good thing in life that one would say any of us should have available to us gets destroyed by disease or carelessness or even human evil. Pastors deal with this stuff on a regular basis. And, pastors who simply wave these things away because we have some imagined justification for seemingly pointless evil. I don't know. I don't have a lot of respect for pastors like that. And I know many other pastors who don't have respect for that kind of thing. So, these questions that we live with are, they've been with us throughout human history for a very long time, inside and outside of Christendom. And, but I think any religion that wishes to offer people consolation and strength and courage and inspiration to move through this difficult world, you have to deal with these questions. And, the other side of this, though, is that when someone is facing horrendous and seemingly pointless loss, it is of real pastoral utility to, with a degree of integrity, say, I cannot by any means offer a justification for this horrendous and pointless loss. But based on this story and our tradition, I can tell you that I do have hope that there can somehow be something which potentially redeems this. And, if whether or not you can feel that hope, or if you have to borrow some of that from me, I will do what I can to sit with you in your pain and do what I can with you. But just the possibility of hope is sometimes all that stands between someone enduring a painful passage and pushing off suicide or even worse than suicide, often, retribution, where they will try to even a score, which almost always sets up a cycle of retribution. Where I can say, I had a conversation with a woman who, her husband left her 1 month into her pregnancy. And it was a powerful conversation about marriage, because I know a lot of people would think her crazy, but she, after this thing, she had walked away from the faith, but she found it again. And she is living a life working hard to not be bitter and to try to bless her husband. And in her words, still, stand for her marriage, even if her husband is off with this, with this woman that he left her for,
Oh.
but she will, live her life and raise her daughter, not with bitterness against her ex, but and so she, I find the kind of spiritual resources she needs to love a man that all of us would reasonably say she could call him her enemy. That kind of courage, what I deploy in situations, pastoral situations like this, is a story to say, I can't do the math for you, but I do hope that somewhere in this universe, your suffering will not be in vain. And that's the powerful thing.
Thank you for saying that, Paul. Maybe I'll make a point and then we can take it up in the conversation, because I've been I make connections to what you're saying and to Tillich's The Courage to Be, and this idea about encouragement and what that has to do with connections to the incarnation and the possibility or the difficulty of seeing teleology. I want to explore these things with you and with JP.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but I would also really like to just see you hold that in mind when you talk to Jordan Peterson, John.
I'm getting a lot of advice, John, from a lot of people. All the time when I talk to Jordan Peterson.
I can imagine. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I don't want people to stop giving me advice. I have the people that have been with me throughout this whole, I guess, social media career that I've launched into, and they've been constantly giving me good advice. And some of them have, themselves been student of Jordan's, and so they know from the inside, not just from the outside. I have a lot of thoughts. I'm also getting a little bit anxious. I think there's a lot of expectations for this, and I share them, by the way. A lot of expectations for this dialogue. So what I'm aspiring to do is prepare as best and as authentically I can, and try to go into that with as much of the good faith that I've been able to cultivate and practice with people like Paul and JP and Jordan Hall, etc., Guy Senstock. So that's what I'm aspiring to. I suppose that's my hope, to use one of Paul's words right now.
Well, actually, what I would suggest that you try to do is just to convince Jordan to have many conversations with you instead of having to do it all in 2 hours.
Well,
so,
we've had several in the past, so I'm hoping that the part of his current discussions that I'm very interested in is, this isn't quite the right adjective, but all of the religious aspects of his work. I am deeply, I'm sorry, this may offend some people in this community, I'm deeply uninterested in his political vision, but he already knows that, because I've told him that in a respectful manner. I think that his argument should be treated with respect. But as I've continually said, I'm more interested in the meaning aspects of Jordan's work, and I'm hoping, because that's always been what we talked about in the past. So one of my hopes is that will be what we get into when he and I get to talk.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not a 2-hour conversation. But I'm taking everybody else's time here now, so I'm just going to shut up. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you, Strong.
Thank you, Strong, and thank you, Paul, for being a good sport and jumping in at a moment's notice. Really appreciate your time here tonight.
All right. I'm sorry I got to run, but I do have another commitment.
Thanks, Paul.
Good talking to you, Paul. Thanks.
Good talking to you, John. Bye-bye.
Nabia, you have a question for John.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. So yeah, my question is just about if you know the work of the Center for the Study of Digital Life. They're like some sort of organization that just started, I think, a few months ago. Or actually, they started before, but they've only kind of gone public recently, and they published this little journal where they're talking about a lot of related things that you're also talking about. I've heard Stallman, who's kind of the leader of that organization, talk about this axial age-like shift that's happening today, the change in like psychotechnology, what they're calling like the digital, the effect of the digital environment that we now have, that it's having on our psychotechnologies. And they're working with a lot of, I think they're kind of on a similar track to your own thought, I think. And they've also actually addressed both your work and Jordan Peterson's work in an essay from by Adam Pugin, who I think is also from U of T. So I'm just curious if you've like looked at that and if you have any thoughts on it.
I've looked at it and I watched the video where they discussed my work, and I thought they treated me fairly, and they made some criticisms. At some point I'd like to respond to them. But I'm hesitant to say very much because I have not looked into their work deeply. So I'm aware of them, and I'm aware of the connections that I've seen them explicitly make between their work and my work. I'm really hesitant to say much more about that. I mean, I thought that particular video was well done, and I thought it was thoughtful and fair. I didn't agree with everything, but whoever does, right? But I'm sorry. I wish I could say more, but that's the extent of my knowledge right now.
Okay, just a related thing then. So one of the things they're kind of very influenced by is Marshall McLuhan's ideas. Yeah. And I know you probably know about him, but I don't recall seeing you like explicitly mention him. So I'm just wondering if like how do his ideas fit into your own work?
Well, I mean, I used to, when you want, they used to have them in Canadian television, those, historical moments, and they would show the colonnade where Mcluhan did his work, right? And, basically his office and my office were basically the same. And so he's kind of a haunting presence. I haven't studied his work in depth, but I have been influenced by people who have studied his work, particularly the idea where that's particularly resonant with me right now is the emergence of the digital campfire medium and the way that is plugging into our cognition on one hand and our sociality on another hand, and into technologies that are becoming themselves autonomously intelligent in a way that I think supersedes what Mcluhan was talking about when he was talking about print and TV and television, and that medium, or perhaps those media, are going to be internalized into us in very powerful ways. I was talking with Elizabeth the Bold and Thomas Stenninger from Evolve this morning, and Thomas made the point, which I agree with, that the printing press makes the novel possible, and then the novel interacts with elements from the Protestant Reformation and the Cartesian Revolution. The first novel is arguably Don Quixote, and you get this idea of a kind of individualism, the central character in a narrative, the novel, sort of the novelistic narrative understanding, and it gets so deeply internalized because of the growth of the novel, and then the way that format gets replicated to so significant degrees in plays and on TV, and that we're now moving into something that's very post-novel, and where we have where distributed cognition is being made more powerfully salient to us, and people are starting to generate models of the self, and I'm exploring that in the elusive eye, that are much more dynamical systems and network models, rather than sort of a singular monadic mind. And so I think we are seeing the beginnings of people internalizing a view of cognition and mind that is starting to reflect the structural functional organization of the networks being found, the dynamical self-creating and self-perpetuating networks found within the virtual world. And so that that is deeply inspired ultimately by the kind of work that Mcluhan has done, but it's also trying to see how it might be a profound kind of change that, and this is not a criticism of Mcluhan, he couldn't have foreseen it, but I think this has the potential to change us in a way in which, for example, which greatly exceeds what television did to us, which was already significant, as Mcluhan rightly pointed out. And whether or not that means we're coming to something like something analogous to the axial age is something I take very seriously. So, again, I'm not a Mcluhan expert, and I'm not claiming that. What I'm trying to share with you is the way in which the mode of investigation and theoretical reflection that he didn't originate, but he made it prominent and was a major driver for it. I mean, it's having a huge impact on my thinking right now.
Yeah, that's interesting. One of the other influences on their thing was Magda Arnold, and they're kind of going for like a faculty psychology approach. So they're trying to talk about the effect. One of the effects that they're saying digital has on our cognition is this sort of extension of memory, because they're arguing that that's kind of the fundamental characteristic of computers and of the digital world is perfect memory, and that this will sort of formally shape our cognition.
I mean, there's truth to that, but there's also difficulties with it. I mean, so part of the problem is not the storage of memory, but the access of memory. And what we're seeing is a countervailing tendency in which people are accessing this information in ways that are very much, confirmation porn, and echo chambering and bubble formation. That is also something that needs to be taken into account. I'm also interested in how, like, the way we record these things and how we seem to be breaking boundaries between the public and the private. We're getting something like the permanency of writing, but the living vibrancy of oral discourse. There's a lot of the fundamental grammar is being broken down. And you're right. On one hand, we're getting this almost omniscient memory, but I think I'm also correct in saying, on the other hand, we're getting this proliferation of self-deceptive access to that information. So I think it's very complex.
Yeah, I agree. That was really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a really great question. I really enjoyed it.
Hey, thank you. Michal, you have a question for John. I've sent you an invite. You have to accept it, or else I can read. Yes, I'll go ahead and read it. What role do you think St. Augustine's mother plays in his transformation, and how would it show in his writings? And he says, "Thank you for all your wonderful work. I'm grateful for your dedication and sincere commitment to these conversations."
Wow. It's a good question, and I've been negligent in not bringing that out. I've been at pains to try and emphasize something that is sometimes not given enough emphasis in the discussions around Augustine or Augustine, namely that he has a Neoplatonic mystical experience that he himself argues happens before he's a Christian and actually affords his metanoia into Christianity. And so I've been sort of trying to emphasize that Neoplatonic aspect, which I think has been at times backgrounded, and the possibility of those experiences coming from somebody who's at the core, the core of the Christian tradition. And that might have caused me to it did cause me to underemphasize the important influence that Monica has on him, because I believe that's her name. I read the Confessions a couple times. I believe I'm remembering her name correctly. Because she And there's no indication in Augustine of any sort of saccharine romanticism about her, but she seems to have a capacity for a steadfast agape. I'm not trying to do the usual, women are the soft afforders, that bullshit. I want to put that aside, but because there's definite courage and commitment in what she's doing, but she seems to act as this pull on him that he is not aware of, in terms of just a resolute, maybe that's what I want to say, a resolute agape that I think is pivotal. And the fact that he can share a mystical experience with her, is a testament to how deeply woven into the sinews of his cognition her perspective was. So I think that's important. And it goes towards something that I've been trying to emphasize more in my more recent work, which is, and this is something that I think is very important, and that's the role of attachment. I don't mean in the Buddhist sense, but I mean in the psychological sense, the John Bowlby, Ainsworth sense of attachment, the relationship between a parent and a child, which I've already argued is foundational, the foundational metaphor, or even exemplar of agape. But the idea that our attachment relationships. So there's very few really robust and reliable theories, especially in social psychology. Many of the purported ones have fallen by the wayside under the grinding wheel of the replication crisis. But attachment theory is not failing. It is robust and reliable, and it is powerfully predictive. After measurements of your general intelligence and perhaps measurements of some of your big five personality characteristics, the one thing I'd really want to know about you is your attachment style, because it is so predictive of your capacity to enter into intimate relationships, not just sexual or romantic, but friendship and perhaps even sacred relationships like the relationship to God. And there's something going on, and we only get a taste of it, but there's something going on between Monica and Augustine that points to the tremendous power of attachment relationships and how we need to incorporate attachment theory into our project of Socratic self-knowledge. One of the things everybody should try and figure out using some of the best psychometric measures we have available is what their attachment style is, because I think that's very important. And so I think Monica is an exemplar of a profoundly conducive kind of agape, and there's an indication of the importance, which I don't think Augustine understands or appreciates, but the importance of attachment relationships being a fundamental way in which our cognitive grammar and even the structures of our experience are created and maintained. So I hope that was at least a helpful answer.
Yeah, Michal, you've managed to join us, so you can respond. Thanks.
Yeah. I'm working outside, building a garden. Thank you so much, John Vervaeke. I mean, there's much more that I would like to explore with this question, because I you can see in his writing that he has a lot of appreciation for his mother, and it's one of my you could say instinct that without her agape, the way he describes it or writes about it, we would not know about it if it weren't for her. And that is at the core of his writing.
I think that I think two things make possible his conversion to Christianity, and I'm not proselytizing for Christianity. One is the one I've emphasized, which is he says it was the Neoplatonism that took him out of Manichaeanism, and gave him his first taste of eternity, to use his language. But I think that, well, and given our current psychological knowledge, I think his attachment relationship to his mother also affords his relationship to God. I believe her name is Erstad, and she talks about how the West really lost God. She talks about how the Industrial Revolution created nuclear families, And the loss of extended families really reduces our attachment repertoire and also the reservoir from which we can internalize multiple perspectives. And she says that has actually tracked with people sort of losing the sense of God in their life. And I mean, I think she is a believing Christian, but whether or not there's metaphysical reality to the referent isn't maybe necessary to her argument. I think at the point that how people, if you'll allow me to speak somewhat simplistically, how people relate to God, if that's the way they want to understand the relationship with the sacred, I think that is deeply bound up with attachment relationships. And I don't mean just in the negative way that Freud made perhaps too famous, but in a positive, conducing way that we're now just beginning to understand. We're beginning to understand how central attachment is to our optimal cognitive and existential functioning.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that excellent question.
Thanks, Mcluhan. Andre, go ahead.
Hi, John. It's been a while since we've spoken. I hope you've been doing well.
Thank you. I hope the same for you.
I'll just preface this by saying I might be a bit emotional and wax lyrical here because I had a good friend of mine die the other day.
I'm so
just 2
sorry.
days ago. Thank you. He's been through a lot of darkness and pain like I have myself, so it sort of hit me a bit harder. And you know what grieving is like, and shock, and it's made me reflect on everything. So this isn't going to be.
Can I ask you how? I mean, I'm sorry. I just feel a bit of a responsibility here because of where you are. Like, are you? I'm really asking you to be honest here. Like, are you okay with this? I mean, this is close. It's proximate. You probably identify with this.
I'm fine. I'm all good with this. I just I want to be honest with you because as you'll hear in my question or my statement rather, it's something I admire about you. So I'm in a good state of mind. I just wanted to
okay, good.
let people know where I'm at. So I just wanted to really comment on. So Brett had said we've had this going for a year. This Discord server, and I had looked, and I've been on here for 10 months, and a lot of that time I've spent with sort of who I'd call the server regulars, Mark, Manuel, Pedro for a while, and people like Albie as well. And for maybe about 3 or 5 months, I've also been working as before the sole moderator, helping run things organizationally and clean things up and just looking after the place. But now we've got some new moderators, so I think we've got a good team going.
Sure.
But we had been working hard at working to build a good community here, to try and embody what I believe you were trying to build with your science of meaning, and the communitas idea, a place where people could come, go through the ecology of practices, go through your knowledge and approach to the science of meaning, find out what meaning is, what the knowledge is, the cognitive science aspect of it, because cognition certainly isn't an easy thing to approach.
Right.
And I'll admit I haven't gone through the 50 hours of lectures like someone like Mark has. I've gone about my own approach. I study psychology myself. But I definitely admire the amount of the huge amount of work you put into that. It's a very sizable work, and it's nothing to scoff at. And but what I think you've done here with this Discord server and the people that I've met through it is you've created a place where I've seen personally so many people find themselves, including myself. It's been a wonder to watch someone like Mark go through your videos and then come back to me and just see this sort of combinatorial explosion of synapses, and his brain just firing off, saying, "Oh, and there's this, and then we've got the 4 types of knowing, but oh, maybe we should change them, but and oh, there's this, and just you can see, I see this man grow in front of me, and it's a beautiful thing, and then I see Manuel struggle here and then he dives into his ecology of practices with the yoga, and he's been doing it very solidly, and it's amazing to see that happen. And he seems to be doing better, and every time I talk to him, he's a new person. And without a system like you've put forward, I don't know if he would have that, but I love seeing my friends grow and heal, and so with this community, it's just a small bunch of us. Really, it's growing now, but we've been doing our darndest to bring people in, to give them the information, tell them who you are, what you're about, what meaning is about, and all the different terms, all the videos, how we can all sort of better ourselves, and I just think it's a fantastic thing that you've done. I've been meaning to say this for quite a while. I've thought about putting it in an email, and hadn't been sure because obviously you're a busy guy. And in addition to that, as someone who is studying psychology, I've watched you in many Q&As, and the way that you measure your words and make sure that you want to get things right and correct, and also have approached very sensitive topics. Like there'd been someone who said that they had lost their job, and someone had died in their family or something like that, and I can see in someone's face when they're being sincere and they have that authenticity, and they consider what they are going to say, because it's going to change that person's life and can potentially make it much for the better, or could be an ill-placed word. And so many times when I watch you work or speak, I hear that authenticity. I see someone who genuinely cares about people in this world, and who wants people to find meaning. And I can't underline enough how much work you've done for people, and how many people I think you've given meaning to, or at least put them on the path for. And a lot of us here really, really respect you. We admire you. And for someone who wants to be a psychologist like myself and heal others, you are a big inspiration. So I just wanted to say all that, John, and it means a lot.
Thank you, Andre. I'm very encouraged that you find my work helpful. I want to strongly emphasize that I think more of the credit for what's going on in the Discord server belongs to Mark and Brett and to Manuel and Pedro. And sometimes we disagree, but it's always a within family disagreement. And we disagree because we share the common goal of building a community that is viable and vital and responsible to its members. And I want to give a lot of the credit of that to the people I've mentioned, to Brett and Mark, and like I said, Manuel and Pedro. And I was doing I was Robert Gray, who comes here quite a bit, and he's a patron of mine, and he invited me to one of his circling, and he led the practice, which is a great pleasure for me. And I know that he'd been here on the Discord server, and he'd obviously taken stuff that he'd learned from me, but it had grown and flourished and flowered here at the Discord server, and I was so impressed by how the practices had grown. They hadn't grown away from, but they had grown from and grown beyond. that I taught, and I was just it gave me such a powerful sense. It was almost like fragrant or palpable of how this community is growing, and I don't just mean in numbers, how it's growing the practices, and it touched it, and that happened on more than one occasion, and I mentioned it to Robert at the time, and of course resonated with that quite and confirmed that quite powerfully, and that had a really huge impact on me. I just wanted to share that. I mean, I'm getting, Andrea, I appreciate and what you said about my impact on you guys, but I mean, that's one instance, and it's not an isolated instance of what how this community is impacting me and encouraging me, and I take very seriously the responsibility that comes with that. That I aspire to being Socrates, and I give him credit for the ways in which you see that I'm showing up with authenticity and a genuine good faith and a desire to really connect and share the following of the logos and agape and midwifery with people. I deeply thank you for saying that, because it gives me hope that my aspiration is not in vain. And I'm very grateful for this community and what it's doing. I mean, we're coming to the end of our time, and so maybe I can take one more question. But I mean, what you said, and I hope I was able to add to it with what I said, is so appropriate to the anniversary of this community. And my sincere hope is that it continues to grow the way it has. And again, I don't just mean grow bigger, but the way it's growing deeper. That's really, really important and really impresses me. I don't know if that was an adequate enough response, Andre, to everything you said, because what you said was so moving and touching, but that's the best I can say.
That was a beautiful response, John. When you say deeper and growing deeper, and you've made us grow deeper in our sort of search for ourselves, and I've certainly grown a lot as a person here, and I think your work and the community here has made me become a better man. So I definitely wish you to keep doing what you're doing, and everyone else do what they do. And yeah, that was a very nice response, and I really appreciate getting the chance to say that to you. And I hope you take care of yourself and your family.
Thank you very much, Andre, and I hope the same for you. Thank you very much.
And Andre, thank you so much for all you've done on this server and those kind words. And I'm sorry to hear for your loss. And yeah, I think that's what this community is, what I had envisioned for this community, and I'm so glad to see that people are getting things out of it, and that's what I think keeps it going. And we have people who go and come back, and I think we're just I think this first year marks a great beginning, but it's just a beginning, and I think we're gonna keep on pushing forward and seeing what we can do. And yeah, I know I think Jack, I had you queued up, but I think we're pretty well at the end of our time. I think Jack and Brandon, if you remind me next time, I'll get you up first. But thank you so much, John, for being here. Your answers are as incisive as always, and thank you everyone for all the great questions. This has been a great Q&A, and thanks for Paul Vanderklay for a surprise guest appearance.
Well, thank you, everyone, and it's been really good to be here and I always love it, and I look forward to next month when we can do it again.
All right. Thanks, everyone, and stay tuned for more. Have a great night.
Take care.
Thanks.